cleanse your soul. Feel it in your veins. Breathe it in, your lungs will stay. It's like love for the first time. It'll all make sense. You know it. It's like love. Cleanse your soul. Feel it in your veins. And your lungs will stay.
Well, Vanakkam, Vandanam, Namaskara, and Namaste. A good morning and a good afternoon to our
Mr. Michael, you are on mute. Can you unmute yourself?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
I'll start again. A very good morning and good afternoon to our officials, industry leaders, entrepreneurs, delegates, and of course, esteemed panellists. From wherever you join us, we'd like to welcome you to this panel discussion on healthcare ecosystems, particularly medical governance systems and the role of incubators and VCs. My name is Michael Costa. I'm the Australian Deputy Consul General based here in Chennai. It's an honour to welcome you to the third day of this Tech and Innovation Trade Mission hosted by the Indo-Australian Chamber of Commerce. Over the past few days, we've been exploring two-way trade, investments and collaboration opportunities, and we've been identifying new ways that we can work together across our respective innovation and technology ecosystems. So it's a great platform. For more than a year though, obviously COVID pandemic has presented unprecedented challenges across the global economy. It's disrupted supply chains, limited access to finance, restricted travel, and most tragically resulted in widespread loss of life and livelihoods. But it has also highlighted the importance of innovating with like-minded countries to ensure a safe, secure and a prosperous future for our citizens. With India one of our closest partners in science, technology and innovation, today we'll explore the role of networking and incubation programs to assist health tech startups to achieve growth and scale, how to strengthen our medical governance systems, collaboration to address challenges across the health tech sector, which is incredibly important in this post-COVID world. So let me introduce you to your moderator. Mr. Irfan Malik is the co-founder and CEO of InQ Innovation Global. For over 22 years, he's been a thought leader in fostering global innovation bridge programs between Australia and India, supporting startup and open innovation ecosystems. He currently supports and mentors over 25 startups globally and is associated with several global accelerators and startup incubators to foster collaboration, exchange, including between our two countries. So before we start, just some housekeeping. We'll have everyone on mute if you're not speaking, just to reduce the background noise. At the end of the session, the panel will take questions and there is a Q&A chat function on the platform to the right-hand side. Please note that we are recording this webinar, and it will also be live streamed as well. So that's all from me, Irfan. I look forward to the insights from industry, academia and startups on the call, and I look forward to working with you to implement any recommendations that come out of this. Thank you, and over to you, Irfan.
Thank you, Michael, for that warm introduction, and I must again acknowledge the support and the active role that you, your team at the Consulate in Chennai and the High Commission and all the folks in Australia play, being there, even throughout COVID, being there in India to support the businesses, especially Australian businesses who are engaged in business and looking to, work and collaborate with the Indian ecosystem. So really appreciate all your work and also continued support as we curate more greater collaboration between these ecosystems. So thanks, Michael, again for that and the warm introduction. Let me begin the session and again with saying namaskar, greetings from Sydney, Australia, where I'm based here. Good evening and good afternoon or late morning there in India and global audience. I think it's a pleasure and honor for me to be moderating the session, and as a close collaborator, partner of Indo-Australia Chamber of Commerce, and also representing Australia-India Business Council, the leadership team, and also as the National Chair for Startup and Innovation as part of the AIBC. Let me begin by acknowledging and recognizing the traditional custodians of the land we gather today in Sydney and globally, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. Kicking off this session, which obviously is of a profound impact and more pertinent as globally countries are grappling with COVID, post-COVID scenarios. They've had all the ups and downs and impact to economy, impact to livelihood, and most importantly, impact to lives as well. And this period obviously made us all realize how important it is to have healthcare services, accessible healthcare services at the right time, and also to be able to connect with the mass through not only technology, devices, but building that whole ecosystem of healthcare network, a global network as well, where you could be challenged by supply issues of products and various geopolitical issues in play as well. But it's important, to realize that providing that accessible, new end healthcare services using technology, embracing technology is more important than ever before, I suppose. So that's something which we have all realized, and all the nations globally are trying to really, really position themselves very well to deal with any kind of this situation down the line, if at all, God forbid, may happen. But most importantly, this has also paved way for global collaboration as well. How do we remove single point sensitivity, but also build a global network and collaboration of like-minded countries, communities, ecosystems to really help, beyond a regional, a country-based view, to look at a global humanity as in a global village, to look at how we can bring together these, impactful healthcare solutions which can be leveraged by everyone, and also aligning to some of the most important sustainable development goals that UN has really, positioned and set the scene globally for us to embrace and adopt. On that note, this is a very important session focused on healthcare tech ecosystem, the startup ecosystem, the medtech ecosystem, the healthcare services ecosystem, and putting a lens of medical governance, the compliance, the regulatory aspects, but also how do we help companies scale to provide access to those solutions to the needy, but also what the role of the ecosystem, the incubator accelerators, and the investor ecosystem, which kind of underpins and supports the scaling as well. So these are the elements that we're going to touch on, and some of the topics which has been outlined. How do we build responsible medical governance systems, the compliance, adoptions of compliance or global standards, where we can fast track adoption and roll out as well, and where I think India as an ecosystem which is embracing Ayushman Bharat, which is a huge, progressive program by the Indian government and the larger ecosystem across the states. How can it look up to other, economies where healthcare is more profound and more regulated, more, quality controlled? How some of those key elements can be embraced, and that's something which we'll explore. Role of VCs and funding ecosystem, which help fast track scaling, adoption, even compliance, conformance to compliance as well. The role of ecosystem play, the partners to play, whether it's incubator accelerators, soft landing programs, or even distribution, global healthcare partners who can play a role in achieving this growth and adoption and scale that we're looking at. And also, of course, collaboration across these ecosystems. What are some of those nuances, what's worked, and what are the things that we could explore? We will try and weave into this conversation. To set the scene and the tone there, we have a great panelist. I mean, we've selectively chosen to have some pioneering efforts that's been happening across Australia and India ecosystem, and people who are already operating in this bridge as well, and who've operated for a long time as well. We've brought them on board here, and I'm really privileged and honored to introduce my panelists here. We've got Kate, the CEO and Managing Director of Alcidian Group. We've got Varun Sood, Group Head and Health and Medical Businesses at Motherson Medical Group, which has got presence in Australia and India. In fact, a huge global presence as well as part of the parent group. We've got Dr. Michelle Bergini, who's a co-founder and CEO of Precigen, who comes with a perfect mix of technology, emerging tech, healthcare, research background as well. And I'm also pleased to have Dr. John, who may be joining shortly, who is a senior research fellow and heads some of the research and innovation activity, and also onboarding support activity to support Australian medtech, healthcare, R&D innovation activities into India as part of the George Institute of Global Health and Research and their footprint across Australia, India, and globally as well. So I'm quite privileged to have Michelle, Kate, Varun, and Uman on board, and I welcome you all on board. Thank you for taking your precious time and being part of what we are curating a history here to connect the ecosystem. Also really play our role. Everyone has at every level has a role to play to make an impactful outcome. So welcome you all on board again. Thank you. The way I would play it out is obviously I've just done a brief introduction here. There's a lot of stories behind these introduction and these people. And I, being living and breathing with startup founders from early stage, the ideation, aspiring entrepreneurs to very successful, VC-backed ventures, all of them have a story to, share. And I want these stories to come out. And that's where my approach is to invite every one of them to kind of introduce their story and also weave into the conversation as well. So if I may, I want to invite Kate, you on first on board, to share your story, to share your journey as well, being in the healthcare, embracing healthcare technology, rolling out globally, and you've had few rounds of, successful adoption, exits, and even further growth as a listed company and having a global footprint. Without much ado, I want to invite you to share your story and even, what's been happening in the global healthcare ecosystem. And how do you see India as a great market?
Thanks, Efren. That's a big lot of topics to put into what I think you want probably to be a fairly short, sharp conversation. I've been in healthcare technology pretty well all my working life, over 25 years. I'm now CEO of Alcidian, which is a digital health company based in Australia, listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, with a presence in New Zealand, Australia, and the United Kingdom. But my story goes back, a long way. I've been through a few organisations, but prior to the current listing company, I was involved some 20 years back with the listing of a company in the UK called iSoft. So it was the first time that was listed on the PLC over there. And back in those days, again, it was very much around, taking new capability and new technology to the healthcare market, to a market in those days it was very paper oriented. So a little bit different to here, but the story is still the same. And the way in which I think to make an impact in healthcare doesn't seem to me to have changed enormously. It's a very reference-based industry, so it's really important that you have a trust and a referenceability and a research background to what you're doing and evidence-based to what you're doing. I think that's been the same forever. So I was involved from the product management side of that and was involved in running the Asia Pacific component of iSoft. And the interesting connection with India there is that we set up one of the first offshore development shops in Chennai back in 2000, where we, recognized that there was this enormous pool of talent that could actually contribute to our team. And I think we started with around 12 or 14 people, and I believe that team's around 2,000 now. And I think several of our early people that joined us have actually gone off and opened their own businesses in India, Healthtech, and it's just fantastic to see that and how that has grown. So I've got a bit of experience with the listed company side of things, but what we're doing with Alcidion, it's in no way a startup. It's a 20-year-old story in a lot of respects. It began in Adelaide, a small group of people very focused on medical engineering in the technology space. An ex-CEO of our South Australian Health joined with a doctor who had a PhD in medical informatics from Stanford, and they were ahead of their time in a lot of ways. And so they built this amazing body of knowledge over probably 15 years, where they had some success, but it wasn't hugely successful because in actual fact, the world wasn't ready for what they were doing. And what they were doing was taking data in healthcare and translating that into meaningful information that can help with decision making at the point of care, something that we're, all still aspiring to do at this point. And it's really only been probably in the last 4 or 5 years where we took all of those learnings and rebuilt in a brand new technology environment, for cloud and so forth, that we've found that the healthcare industry is caught up with us and we're starting to see some success. So I don't want to I know there's lots to my story, but does that cover enough, Irfan, in terms of, where I'm coming from?
Thank you, Kate. I think it's a wealth of experience that comes to the fore there. And again, things that you touched on, evidence-based solutions and the big data that's there to leverage and then use that data to kind of impart that level of healthcare services, which is something which is core to your heart. And look forward to hearing more as we delve a bit more deeper. On that note, if I may invite Varun Sood from India, who's part of this global medicines group, but also has had a profound experience through his life and career, but also being actively involved in an entity which has gone through a pivoting change as well from an entirely different sector to healthcare and healthcare medtech systems, and now operating between Australia and India, and of course globally, has a great role to play in the medtech services adoptions. So Varun, if I may invite you to share your story and touch on those key elements that really take for you as part of the Australia-India collaboration that you see in the healthcare medtech space.
Sure, Irfan, thanks for that. So pleasure being here, first of all. And just as, just to give my brief background, so, just short of about in the healthcare and life sciences space, I have about 20 years, just shy of 20 years experience, and, another 5 in other domains. I've worked across pharmaceuticals, I've worked across healthcare delivery systems, diagnostic chains, and pharmacy chains for that matter, in India and overseas. In fact, on the healthcare delivery side, be it diagnostics and the hospital network is an Asia-backed play. I've done multiple roles in these companies, from strategy to M&A to integration to actually, leading health tech companies and in incubating new startups within the health tech space as well. And of late, a couple of years ago, have just shy of 2 years, have joined Motherson. Motherson is it's a very large global auto OEM company which is pivoting towards or is also entering newer verticals, one of which being health and medical. So I joined them to actually establish the group's presence in the health and medical space. But that said, the group has historically been doing work in the medical space, especially in Australia. We have a presence in Adelaide and in Melbourne, where, being an auto OEM supplier over the last 6 years, I think in the last decade, due to policy changes, OEMs, car OEMs, auto OEMs exited. And with our facilities in play and an ethos of actually not shutting plants, we worked with the teams there, the group worked with the teams there to pivot towards other areas where we started working locally with local universities, startups, and other such companies to help them actually take their ideas, productize them, be it from a technology or a hardware standpoint, and in some cases also take to market. So, and that's been going on for 5 to 6 years. We've been working with multiple universities and organizations on the ground in various sectors, health being one predominant one of those as well. So that's an ongoing story. And with the group, we formally entered this space last year, and I joined to actually set that up with the medical area being a focus area for us. So I have just to summarize, background is in technology, in delivery of healthcare, in healthcare system delivery at a global level, in technology, for medtech and health tech, and now looking to work, and helping a large global company. So just as background, Motherson is about 43 countries, globally has about $12 billion of revenue as of last year, presence around the world. And how do we actually scale and expand into a new business into the medical space for the group? So that's my background.
Great. Thank you, Varun, for sharing your insightful experience and also across Australia-India ecosystem. Look forward to delving a bit more deeper into those collaboration. You touched on those pivoting that your organization did, but also some of the strong ethos of really looking opportunities to scale and collaboration with the universities and ecosystems that you touched on. So we're very relevant for our conversation. On that note, if I can invite Michelle just to share your story. I mean, just listening to you yesterday was phenomenal. So I want obviously you to share your story from a research, innovation, and a startup and exit to another one, which is to scale, embrace emerging tech. It's a phenomenal story, and I think very, very much core fabric of Australia-India Innovation Bridge. So if you can share your story and weave into what your aspirations are with India and globally, that'll be great to hear.
Yeah, thanks so much, Irfan, and to the organisers, really pleased to be here. I do have a bit of a mixed background. So I started off in the healthcare sector and as a medical researcher. So I did a PhD in medicine and spent around 10 years in the oncology space, really looking at kind of data, but from the perspective of identifying new genetic markers that could predict response to disease or response to new treatments in oncology. So I did that for about 10 years. That was a really interesting space. And in 2007, I actually started my first company, which was an AI technology business. And that was with my co-founder and partner, Don, who had come out of the defence sector and saw some commercial application areas for technology that they were developing in the AI sector for military applications. And we thought, there's a whole range of ways that we can practically apply this in the commercial sector. And so I got really involved in artificial intelligence, and we were really pioneers of some very early technology around behavioural AI and modelling consumer behaviour at mass scale. So we would use census data, model whole populations of consumers, and use AI to understand and predict consumer response to new products or new policies. So we did a lot of work with government. We worked across borders. So it was a scalable platform with multiple products in a whole range of different industry sectors. We had offices in Silicon Valley and Australia, but we worked globally, and it was a really interesting time because AI then was just becoming a little bit more mainstream or a little bit more accepted, but still quite early in terms of its commercial uptake. And that particular business was acquired by Ernst & Young in 2015. And then from that acquisition, I had the ability to then start considering how to bring these technology back into the healthcare sector. And I was talking to Irfan yesterday. It's a really amazing time for AI within healthcare. There's kind of unprecedented healthcare costs globally. There's ability for AI to really improve not only clinical decisioning but efficiency within the clinical system, improving patient outcomes, improving the time efficiency of doctors, increasing the amount of patients that we can service, and it's just an amazing way of reducing healthcare costs that are so drastically out of control. So Prestigen is my company. It was founded in 2017. And really, we're an AI healthcare company. We have a vision to create a whole range of healthcare products for women's health. So we're heavily focused in the women's health space. We have a platform that is quite advanced and overcomes some of the key challenges that exist within the healthcare sector around data privacy and access to global data sets that are required to build scalable AI products. And we can go into a little bit more of a discussion about that later. But essentially, we use our platform to collaborate with clinics globally to collect data, train our AI, and build these products that we then scale out to different clinical environments around the world. And we've got a first demonstration of a commercial product that we've developed called Life Whisperer, which is an AI software product for embryo assessment during the IVF process. And essentially, it's completely scalable AI system that allows clinicians to drag and drop images of a patient's embryos that are in culture during IVF, And within 10 seconds, it gives them a quality assessment of each of those embryos and helps them to decide which embryo to transfer back to the patient in the hopes of getting them pregnant. That particular product has regulatory approvals in around 60% of the global marketplace. We have customers in a whole range of different countries, including Australia, New Zealand, Europe, Malaysia, Thailand, and India is actually becoming a very big market for us. It's a really interesting time. What we're all about is kind of building accessible and scalable products that can drive access for patients to technology that's really world leading, but at a low cost and through any clinical environment in the world. So we're all about scale, collaboration, customer access, and solving some of those big challenges within the healthcare sector globally. So that's us.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. That was quite comprehensive. I think your journey and some of the things that you've touched on AI and emerging tech, really helping that awareness, accessibility, and adoption. The 3 A's I relate to in healthcare, and also creating a profound impact, the social element as well, and femtech, that you touched on as well. That's great to know, and I'll delve a bit more deeper as we go into this conversation further. Let me invite the fourth panelist, Dr. Uman John, who's been a strong ally for Australia-India healthcare medtech collaboration, not only as a senior research fellow at the George Institute, which plays a great role within the Australia ecosystem, but also India and global ecosystem, especially focused on non-communicable diseases, NCDs, and they've been present in India for 13 plus years, so has got a great story, and as a researcher as well in health and innovation, I would like you to share your story and your journey and your aspirations with the George Institute and the healthcare spectrum.
Thank you, Irfan. So I'll be brief. So I'm trained as a physician, but I currently work in public health research. And early in my career, I realized that many of the problems that clinicians face can't be solved by medicines or diagnostics alone. It needs innovations. So right soon after my post-graduation, I was put in charge of looking at or measuring outcomes in clinical outcomes. This was about 20 years back. And that is where I had to learn what information technology is, what algorithms are, how do you actually benchmark for clinical outcomes across different care settings. So actually hands-on, had to work with software developers, building a portfolio of solutions to look at clinical outcomes across different clinical settings, and to benchmark them against international parameters, and to say which units are doing well, or which are the patients who are doing well or otherwise. So today we call it AI, algorithm-based approaches. Back then we didn't know the names for it, but we did it 20 years back. Anyway, after that I had a brief opportunity to work with the WHO, and I was at the regional office for Southeast Asia region, where I worked in the immunization strengthening division, looking at information systems as well as immunization strengthening systems. And there again, we deployed quite a bit of innovative technologies, and I particularly had the opportunity to work on a novel vaccine delivery platform, that is nasal vaccine for measles. And since then, I've been always intrigued by how innovations could actually impact large public health outcomes, and how a proper clinically validated pathway is necessary to scale promising innovations, and we need to have the ecosystems in place for that. So since the last 6 years or so, I have been working at the George Institute for Global Health in India, and primarily looking at innovative technologies in public healthcare service delivery, and how can you embed them, see the benefit, and go back to policymakers with that evidence to actually translate this at scale. So we have a number of projects. I wouldn't go into specifically any of those, but one thing which is relevant to today's conversation is that we have a program of work with the government of Andhra Pradesh. We actually run innovation hub for them in a rural, remote healthcare delivery setting. The idea is that in a district with very high burden of non-communicable disease, how can we actually embed health innovations at close to the communities where people live, and actually try out and build the evidence, clinically validate these innovations in the context where they are actually going to be implemented or scaled. So currently that program is on, and at the George Institute we have been focused on bilateral health innovation exchanges. So along with the University of New South Wales under the Health 10X program, we have had opportunities to bring cohorts of health innovators for the exposure to the Indian market. They have had immense opportunity to interact with the Ayushman Bharat program that Irfan mentioned about, and I'm honored to serve the Ayushman Bharat's market access program as a mentor, where we have a cohort currently of 14 startups that are being scaled within the Ayushman Bharat program. So opportunities are plenty. So in a nutshell, what is really needed is identifying the problem at its core and doing all that is needed on the clinical validation and the regulatory aspects for them to be relevant to the ecosystem. So I will stop here, Irfan. Thank you for the opportunity. Really honored to be here. Thank the organizers.
Thank you, man. I think you touched on some amazing points, and which is what we are going to delve into, especially innovation close to the community that needs that impact or the change and access to, and also, collaboration, across larger ecosystem and the clinical trial space and the whole regulatory aspects as well, which is what we're going to move into. If I can invite Kate again, throughout your career experience with various organizations, regulatory conformance, conformance to governance processes, especially looking at some global solutions, that's definitely been profound requirement. What do you see are the challenges that's experienced, especially for companies looking to scale or medtech startups looking to scale? What are the challenges, and how would you kind of guide in traversing through some of these challenges based on your experience?
Yeah, it depends very much on the type of solution you're bringing to market. So you can differentiate your regulatory requirements around those that are related to diagnosis, and the work that Michelle's doing would be very heavily regulated if it was impacting that, for example. But there are many levels, and it comes from, first of all, understanding what the regulatory requirements are in each jurisdiction, and that, we operate across 3 that are very different. Obviously, in the United Kingdom, we've had the European legislation around CE marking and so forth impacting. So the heaviest jurisdiction for us in terms of what we need to do with our software is definitely the UK, where with our software, which is not impacting diagnosis, it is decision support, but it is not changing diagnosis. We still need Class 1 compliance with many of our applications, and so we've needed to really focus on that, and that adds to the cost. You need clinical safety officers, you need advice from external bodies, so you need to focus on that. Also, having quality management system in place across the whole business is kind of needed to drive that in, and so the effort you need to put into achieving those ISO accreditations and so forth are all part of what is, a cost or an overhead doing business in this sector. Closer to home, we've just been through the work on the TGA has just released new here in Australia new guidelines and advice on what is required for software as a medical device here, and we were heavily involved in responding to that and trying to understand, to separate what we do from it being a software as a medical device. But you've got to do that on the right line. I mean, if you are a medical device, and you have to understand that, because we're dealing with people's lives here. So I think that the regulatory component is very important part, but speaking from me as a person who's been running businesses, it is an overhead. It does take a significant cost in your business. It's a critical part of it, but make sure you're aware of that before you head into some of these territories. Because one thing to note about the UK, you are not allowed to market your software until you actually have that certification. That is pretty well the rule. So it's not about just saying, oh, I'll get it when I win my first contract. Legally, you're not supposed to be actually marketing your solution without having that regulatory agreement in place.
So just if I can delve a little bit more, what are those elements that you think we could consider streamlining that, where a country like India with Ayushman Bharat and its own resilient program, which is Atmanirbhar Bharat, is trying to get best practices globally to be adopted as part of the policies. We said it could be very cumbersome, but shouldn't be a barrier for adoption, but it still needs to be conformant so that we've got global standards in terms of efficacies or efficiencies, all those incorporated. So what are some of the things that you would think that India can adopt or consider to adopt from the TGA or FDA or the CE processes?
Yeah, I mean, I've been the process that the TGA has gone through with where we've got. It's been really collaborative. There's been an awful lot of engagement from the sector and into it, and I think they've come out with a pragmatic solution. And I'm a pretty pragmatic person about these things, although I am operating on this side of the diagnosis line. So if I was a person that was using any of these medical devices, I would want the highest standard of regulatory authority applied to something that was going to be injected into me or something like that. So you've got to be really clear about that line. It's a very clear line. You need to make sure that people can't skirt around it. The FDA in the US has shied away again from software as a medical device unless it's clear that it impacts diagnosis. As a matter of fact, I think the FDA has possibly not gone as far as what we're seeing in Australia and the UK. So I think you could look at some of those jurisdictions for where they're heading for a pragmatic, but still very strong set of guidelines from a safety and efficacy perspective.
Great. Thank you, Kate, for sharing those insights. If I can call in Varun, if you can share, obviously you've been involved in adoption, distribution, and even across the footprint that you have globally in terms of scaling some of these medtech or solutions as well. What are the challenges that you've seen, especially conformance to governance and compliance practices, and what are the avenues you see will be better to streamline as India looks to adopt more improved and progressive policies?
Great question, Irfan. So let me actually I'm going to start with the perspective of a buyer of Healthtech, and I was the group CTO for a large Asian healthcare network. I think the first challenge that comes up as far as technology adoption goes in the Healthtech space is if you were to step back, who are the primary users? So you have the admin side, and that's one side. That's simple to do, and everyone kind of adopts that. But when you get into the clinical aspects, or the IPD side, or even the OPD side clinical aspects, it's primarily the nurse and the doctor. And depending on what country you're at, what volume of patients you've got, time becomes a constraint, and ease of entry becomes a constraint for actually being able to use systems. Yeah. And getting technology in is actually the biggest challenge. Is not what the tech can do. It's actually getting your key users to start using it, right? I mean, if you don't have the data, tech is as good as whatever it is. It's as good as the cost it's for, right? So a challenge is actually on ease of use for actually primarily, I would say, nurses, and then coming to doctors, right? Because nurses are 80% of touch point in a hospital. 70 to 80% of touch point is a nurse as far as the patient goes. The interaction is there, right? Now, if you take that up, and so the second question that comes up is the cost of the tech. Price points vary across geographies. So an Australian price point for a patient admitted for a certain medical or operating procedure can be different vis-a-vis in India. And if you're running, if you're running a private business in healthcare, well, it's for profit. You've got to also make money around it, and the cost conversation comes into play. Now, if it was universal health funded by government, different conversation. Yeah. So there's a ease of use by doctors, nurses. There's a price point of the tech that comes into play. And I think the third biggest one is the quality of the data. And if you see around the world, one thing I found to be very uniform is non-clinical data quality is very high, right? So you have every detail on billing, what medicine prescribed, where prescribed, or what is billed to a patient is all captured there, and that data is phenomenal. You can use that, but as soon as you come to the clinical side, I don't know. Yeah, and that was my one takeaway from being a buyer of tech, as a group CTO at this thing, to saying, look, end of the day, the one place where you have data available at high quality is clinical data is purely diagnostics. Because it's more or less machine generated. While on the healthcare delivery standpoint, wherever you have a nurse and a doctor interacting and a patient coming to play, that qualitative data is iffy. I mean, yes, you can plug, some countries have gone to 18% GDP cost simply because of regulations and cost of tech coming into play to what they're adopting. Yeah. But it's not worked out. Yeah. So it's a challenge, and the primary challenge for health tech in a clinical setting is one, availability of data, second, quality of data. Diagnostics, yes, we will have that, and in the healthcare delivery side, more on the admin, but questionable on the how should I put this, on the clinical side, right? And various reasons, nothing right or wrong. It's just reality of the world, right? So now if you take that and then you look at, and then comes the regulatory aspect now, and the world as I've seen it in being in life sciences and healthcare over the last now 20 years, we have moved more towards health health data being a national security. It's a how should I put this? It's more a core data for a nation than anything else. Now, the challenge for health tech comes into play. Yes, you can have systems on HISs and clinical decision support systems, etc., which can work on a subset of data. But as soon as you want to do what Michelle is doing, or you want to get into areas where you want to get access to much larger source of data, restrictions on where it can reside, what can happen, data at rest, data at movement, etc., those things become a nightmare. Yeah. And I think that's one reason why a solution which can actually scale and solve problems globally is not at play. So if as a world we want to impact lives using technology, and I'm using software more than hardware at scale, we need to actually start thinking differently of sharing data across, anonymized or whatever. I mean, that has to be looked at. But how do you share data, and how do you make it available? And yes, there are privacy concerns, and there are many aspects to be looked at. But true benefit will only come at scale when data is available at scale. Yeah. So as I see it, having done this in multiple areas, so I think technology will, from a regulation standpoint, yes, if you're looking at devices or software as a medical device, there are regulations that need to be looked at. Now, and in my mind, the world is primarily in two parts. Right? There is the CE mark based view on medical devices, and there's the FDA side, right? And most countries around the world kind of align to one of two of these. Yes, you'll have a Japan doing a little different, China going different, and the TGA also asking for its own nuances, but more or less their alignment is along those two standards per se, what the FDA sets or what the European standards are. The one big exception I'd call it is Brazil, and Visa works very differently, and they require very different regulations per se as they go there. Does it make it for a health tech player is actually, I would suggest, in my view, I've done a couple of startups, failed and succeeded in both ways. I think the key comes into being very clear on the problem you're trying to solve, and then looking at the regulatory aspect. And there are, India will give you a faster path to certain things vis-a-vis Europe, or some other countries. But it would change as soon as you get, if the solution or the product you're trying to solve changes. So yes, if you're getting to a public health solution at high impact but non-diagnostic or that matter, just inputs to a clinician in that manner, simpler. If you get into hardware devices, simpler. But as soon as you get into a class 2 plus device, complexities start building up. Yeah. Should there be regulatory harmonization across the world? Yes, but I don't see that happening. And that's where the complexity is. I mean, it's again a national challenge, and those are the 2-3 things: the data and the regulatory harmonization, which is actually stopping healthcare tech to actually scale globally. People have tried, big companies have tried and failed, not worked. Yeah.
I get that, Warren. I think that's one of the inherent challenges, and actually a cost factor as well. As medtech companies scale or look to scale into different markets, all those regulatory conformance that adds to the cost, time to market and adoption as well. Challenging, but obviously, whether India can accept TGA as a conformance, for fast tracking adoption, because that's very highly regulated and stringent, lenses have been put forward, or it aligns to FDA or CE. All those things are out there. But I think there is an element. I mean, for faster adoption, it's important that somehow we accept some global, conformance standards, or range of global conformance standards, and then see how we can fast track adoption. On that note, let me call in Michelle. Obviously, you've had few experiences, and you are in that zone of diagnostics and inferences made based on the data and using emerging tech as well, where definitely those conformance standards are paramount important. So what do you see are the challenges, and what are your thoughts that we can learn from and to streamline and to make the adoption faster?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So I've got a bit of a similar view to Varun on this. So we obviously operate at the intersection of life science and AI, which kind of cuts across both regulation but also data compliance. And many of the digital health solutions do have those kind of compliance and regulatory elements. And so, when we look at deploying our product at scale, when we talk about scalable AI technology, what you're really talking about is entering every different country with a different regulatory framework, every country or region with different data compliance like GDPR and HIPAA compliance, ISO certifications, different regulatory bodies from CE marking to FDA to TGA and everything in between. And it is quite costly, and it's quite difficult to navigate those. One of the ways that we've overcome that as a company is by trying to meet the highest level of data compliance and regulatory standard that we would need in the world, and then working our way back down. That's not always the best approach for startups, but for us, we always had this global scalability as our core tenet of our technology. But if we think about kind of taking health technologies to market, it's really complicated. You go from data collection, and I'll talk about some of the challenges there, regulatory approvals, technology validation. So how do you do the clinical trials? Where do you do them to meet those regulatory requirements? How do you get collaboration among those clinical providers to do those trials? The technology adoption investment's quite difficult in this space, because on the one hand, you're building scalable technology, but on the other hand, it's heavily regulated. It's quite expensive and upfront cost for scalable product development. And then it's all about kind of engaging partners and distributors and getting that product out to market. So it is quite complex. And as a company, we've focused on kind of overcoming some of the key challenges to scalability within the healthcare sector. And we think that's kind of the way of the future. And those challenges are around data privacy. So you can't build an AI product at scale if it's not built on globally diverse data. It's just impossible. So you need access to global data sets, but as Varun mentioned, you can't move them internationally across borders. So how do you deal with that? So we've built kind of this global cloud platform and federated AI training system. So instead of moving all the data and training our AI, we send our AI out to train on locally distributed data all around the world. And so we've overcome the challenge. Data quality is another massive issue. Clinical data, unfortunately, is inherently poor quality, and it impacts the accuracy and scalability of technology. And so you need a way of dealing with that. So we've come up with some unique algorithms in that space. And then data collaboration. So in order to collect and have input from the clinical providers who own the data, you can't just ask for the data for free. They know that their data has value and they want to monetize it in some way. So you need to build a collaborative model that brings them into that process, gives them a way to derive value out of their data, and gives them a way to kind of be part of that building of those technologies. And so they're the three things that we focused on really heavily: overcoming the data privacy, data quality, and clinical collaboration. And what we found is that in that way, we're kind of aligning the incentives of all of the players that are required to build these really truly scalable products. And we're building a marketplace for those products once they're actually taken out to market. And it's been quite an effective way of kind of building these scalable products that are having worldwide impact. And they're out-of-the-box products, which is very unusual for AI. So I think instead of trying to change the regulatory framework globally, which is going to be very difficult, if not impossible to do, and trying to align all those regulatory and compliance needs, we've tried to overcome the core challenges to, overcome some of those restrictions or challenges, and build our own way around them, if you like.
Great. Thank you for sharing those insights. I might have a quick question again. very quickly, if you can respond, what is your recommendation for startups, medtech startups looking the pathway? Is it TGA, CE, FDA, or is it CE, FDA, and TGA? Or companies looking to scale? Is there any right answer, or is it horses for courses?
For us, it was meet the highest level of regulation, but then go for those approvals that are the least burdensome. So we went CE marking first, TGA, and then CE marking. We're still pursuing FDA.
Great. Okay, thank you for that. Let me invite Dr. Uman, if you can share your experience. Obviously, you're mentoring a lot of medtech startups as they align and adopt to the Ayushman Bharat, which is like even one of the profound, impactful program of work that Government of India has initiated for access to medication, healthcare services to the masses, to the tier 2, tier 3 cities, and even the regional rural population, which is a big chunk in India. So what is happening, as part of that Ayushman Bharat in terms of setting policy framework, in terms of governance and compliance? Are they looking to, get best of breed of TGA, FDA, CE, and then pull together something which is then, we can adopt as far as the startups go? So that's one aspect. The other aspect is India, with this Atmanirbhar Bharat, is inviting global medtech companies to come to India, not only to manufacture, produce, do the clinical trial for India, but also for the world. So we're looking at a large kind of a market opportunity as well that India is inviting. So how does the whole governance and compliance policy, play in the scheme of things? What's your experience, and how is that being handled by mentors like you?
So thank you, Irfan. So I'll take the example of vaccine. So India is the vaccine hub of the world. In fact, 80% of many of the UN pre-qualified vaccines actually are manufactured out of India. So what happened is that when you're looking at a market that is as diverse as UN pre-qualification, you have to rise up to the standard of what the regulatory frameworks are there. And that is what exactly happened to the both the vaccine regulatory part of the equivalent of FDA here, or the Drug Controller General of India. So what happened is that naturally, because of the demand that was actually generated by the market outside, the regulatory framework rose up to a level that had to comply to the demand outside. So similarly, a large manufacturing happens in the generic medicines exports as well. So here again, the regulatory, although one could say that it is not as well regulated as other economies, it is regulating to the level to which it is necessary, both for the domestic market as well as to comply to the large global demand. So which way will it take? Would it go the TGA way, the CE way, or the FDA way? We'll have to wait and see. But I think what is also happening is that software as a medical device is being considered, and one key focus of the government is also looking at health technology assessment. So it's not only just very strict regulation and compliance to regulation, but does it really make the cost effectiveness, the cost benefit parts of it as well. So as we speak, there has been a whole range of consultations that the Drug Controller General of India has initiated on the regulation of both medical devices as well as on software as a medical device. So we will have to wait and see. But that being said, Ayushman Bharat is very, very keen on seeing innovation being embedded in the delivery of the world's largest insurance-based health delivery program. And that is why there is a market access program where innovators or health startups have been embedded within the system to address some of those things. One of the key mandates that has been given to the market access program, mentorship program, is to make sure that both clinical validation, regulatory requirements, as and when they evolve, even with a focus on, do we see scale beyond the Indian market? Do we see adjacent markets? Do we see markets in emerging economies as well as in high income countries? Is there. So if you ask me a yes or no answer, no. We don't have one now, but it is emerging. And again, if I'll step back and take the example of the software industry. Okay, one of the reasons why India became a software export hub for the global demand is because it was not very tightly regulated. Okay, what India did is that India created a very facilitatory environment and said it is the onus of complying to regulation in the US market or in the European market or the UK market is yours. So by creating that ecosystem, they actually helped the industry to grow at a really rapid pace and meet the demand that would have otherwise been really killed by a very strong regulatory pathway. So regulation is extremely important, but I think taking a pragmatic approach to regulation is important. So I don't have an yes or no answer to this. I will just stop here.
Very well said. I think, yeah, having that pragmatic approach is important. And again, leaving it up to the consumption country or destination to really figure out those compliance. I'm just cognizant of the time, and I definitely want to delve enough time on that topic, but I just want to switch the gear now and have a quick, sharp kind of engagement touch point on some of the other topics. Quickly, Kate, again, clinical trials. What are the things that you've experienced as being challenging and how critical it is for adoption and scaling?
For us, it's really interesting because we've done, not too many people do actual clinical trials on digital health deployment. It's pretty rare. And our very first deployment of our nursing care system, which was capturing observations at the bedside, applying early warning scores and identifying deteriorating patients, we did a full clinical trial with that at Central Manchester Foundation Trust in the UK about 10 years ago that was published. And it was one of the very early, papers that were really looking over the period of 18 months at what the deployment of that technology actually delivered in terms of reduction in cardiac arrest, reduction in length of stay. So hardcore evidence, unlike benefits realization, which is something that everyone walks around going, which is good, it helps people to get funding to put their technology in, but it's not necessarily hardcore clinical trial. And so I think that has hugely helped us in terms of our entry into that market. Off the back of that, we've seen a lot more, papers and research done around that. But for us, in terms of real clinical trials, because we're not impacting diagnosis as such, there's probably others on the panel that have more experience than us, but I just was fascinated to be part of that because we still don't see very much in that space around the true deployment of digital health. And I think we need to, for considered adoption, there are still some resistors that it's an evidence-based industry, and I think that's good for all of us that it is.
Great. Thank you, Kate. I will call Umman again because you guys live and breathe in the clinical trial space. Quite a lot of that you foster global clinical trials in India. How do we fast track that? How do we support a large-scale medtech ecosystem, through the clinical trial regime, through collaboration with the healthcare groups or hospitals or educational institutions? How do you see we can have fast track adoption of clinical trials?
Thanks, Irfan. There is plenty of opportunity. In fact, George Institute in India in the COVID time has been running about 6 clinical trials, mostly on the therapeutic side. But we do see opportunities for medical devices as well. In fact, we have a novel 3D printed mask that is currently under review by the Drug Controller General of India for regulatory approval for conducting the clinical trials in India. So there is definitely opportunities for that, and a lot of the work that we do is evaluating our digital health tools in health systems context. So real world scenario, implementation science scenario, working closely with the governments and the private sector players to generate the evidence. One thing I want to flag off here is that typically when we apply the principles of clinical trials, we go for designs either of non-inferiority or the typical drug delivery discovery and approval of new molecule approach. But for digital, the outcomes that one measures need to be very different, because digital quite often is an enabler. Okay, so there would be n number of other components that cannot be easily teased out when we're looking out at the outcomes. So this is something that as part of the group that I belong to, with the WHO ITU working group on, or focus group on AI for health, what we are doing here is that can we look at novel trial designs for evaluating AI-based approaches, emerging frontier tech approaches, because the typical clinical trial designs, the gold standards of that don't necessarily translate into measuring the outcomes and the impact. So I will just stop here, Irfan, in the interest of time. We need fewer approaches to clinical trials. There are excellent clinical trial networks in Indian context that medtech, health tech, even biotech should explore.
Thank you, Uman. Michelle, if I can get your thoughts on what's been your best experience of clinical trials and where you would see, improvements.
Yeah, I strongly agree with both of the previous comments. One, clinical validation is critical, even in a digital health context, and I think it really needs to be done in order to, justify the use. Because even in situations like ours, clinical decision support is incredibly important, and it's really important to be doing international clinical studies. I think one of the issues is exactly as Uman just mentioned, the regulatory requirements and the traditional clinical trial design don't match digital health, and particularly with technologies like AI, we've had a lot of issues with this, where traditional randomized controlled trials are what are required by certain regulatory bodies like the FDA, but it's really not how you test an AI-based clinical decision support. And prescribing how decision support is used in the clinic is very difficult, and prescribing that in an RCT design is very difficult. But the regulatory side hasn't kind of kept pace with the technology and how best to test it. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done around, building different testing models for validation of these technologies. But I do agree that validation is incredibly important. We've done international clinical studies with our technology. They're all published. The scientific and clinical community wants that. They expect that. That's how they build their trust in these systems.
Great, thank you, Michelle. If I can call in Varun, from a sales and distribution perspective, you've got a large footprint, global footprint. How do you help some of these medtech companies fast track clinical trials and go to market? So if you can chime in quickly on that, that'll be great.
So Irfan, on the clinical trials, I think there is, Michelle and Omin and Kate have covered it. End of the day, it's a question of going through the rigmarole of the process required by that certain regulator in that country, and you've got to go through it. That said, I think it's from a clinical trial standpoint, it also varies depending on what you're doing. So if you do a medtech device, which is also using software, or which is hardware with a software combination, could be different vis-a-vis a pure medtech device vis-a-vis just pure software in that manner. Yeah, I think so there is no bypassing a clinical trial. From a regulatory standpoint, depending on the countries you want to get into, you would need to go through it as it stands. I think the best way, the approach to take, if you have the time and the money in that manner, is to actually plan and execute for the highest bar that you have in that manner, to the point that Michelle said, to be able to cover. Otherwise, you have to go step by step and pick your focus geographies and focus regulators, and then start from there. Yeah. And that's one reason, if you see, is where people startups typically follow where the money is, right? So you'll see a lot of this happening in the US, because the value for health tech is in the US, followed by parts in Europe, and the rest of the world somewhere is along the way happens, right? So it kind of emanates out of there, for that matter. Right? So it's actually follow the money. It's not follow the impact. It's more follow the money conversation which is happening, right? Okay. And it's the right thing to do from a startup standpoint in that manner. Yeah. But if you want to follow the impact, you've got to do it differently. Right? Okay. You pick up Asia, you pick up a thing. Now, from a go-to-market, and that is where the go-to-market comes into play by the end of it. I mean, look, it all depends. So there's no one answer to how do you help people go to market. It depends on what are you solving for, be it hardware or software, the medtech or health tech in that manner, or a combination, and where is the highest impact. So our approach is, so from what we are doing now, the approach we've taken is we fixed, for example, an aspiration to possibly touch 1 billion lives by 2025. So for us, the focus is on how do you find help startups or your own technologies which can actually help touch those many lives. So we've started, and that leads us to focus on geographies like Asia and like Africa, where you need to focus on technologies, or be it medtech or health tech for that matter, which can help, can be adopted fast, is rugged for use, and is low cost, because those are the three drivers. And so we look at volume need and impact on people, and then decide where to go. So, and we've set up networks to actually, we were in the process setting a network to actually be able to scale technology in that front. Yeah. So we're not following, so the idea being we are an impact-driven organization, or focus in that matter, instead of a value-driven organization. So picking the high volume impact vis-a-vis the thing. So the go-to-market will vary. Regulations, like I said, to summarize, it's a question of what you're focusing on. So for me, a regulatory focus is very different from a US-based or US-focused startup, for that matter. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Varun. And again, it's horses for courses. We'll probably come back to that. But I want to switch gear and probably cover two topics which we need to cover quickly. And I'll start with Kate again. You've been experienced at investment raise, exit, and IPO and listing and all. What are the best sources of investment raise, VCs, or from early stage to when do we go IPO? Can you quickly, within a minute, give your insights on what's the best experience you've had?
Oh, Irfan, it's courses. You need to be in a different part. It's an evolution for sure. IPO, all I can say is moving to a listed company is a very, very big step to take. It is not just about looking at the joy of having access to capital when you need it. There is a very heavy tax that comes with that in terms of your impact and how you need to constantly be available to the markets in that sense. So you need to take that in mind. So you could sit here and talk about the pros and cons of all of them for quite some considerable time. Startups obviously aren't going to look to become a listed company. They need to look through VC, PE. You just need to understand what's in it for them. If you don't understand what's in it for your PE before you go into it, you're probably going to be quite disappointed through that journey. So I think, be very, very educated and eyes wide open no matter what avenue you take.
Great. Having those strategic investors as well, especially early stage, what else value they're looking for and what they bring to the table to be considered. So very, very true. If I can call in Michelle, what's your view? You've had one successful exit through Big Four, but also on road to the other through the fundraise. What's your view on the best investment raise platform from early stage to exits?
I think the best way to work that question out is to align incentives. You need to be aligned. So you need to have strategic investors who understand your space because, for example, in our area, no point in having someone who understands scalable software but has no appreciation of the challenges within the life science space. They need to understand both because otherwise they're driving towards a dollar, which is going to be at the kind of detriment of building a scalable platform, which then will ultimately generate a lot more revenue. So you just need to align with investors who understand the vision and who understand the requirement to be able to enact that vision. And they come in all sorts of sizes and shapes. Sometimes it's strategic partners, sometimes it's through kind of big global distribution deals, sometimes it's traditional VC investors, or sometimes it can be the IPO route. And I don't think there's any right or wrong time. One thing I would say is that in the life science sector, a lot of companies do list, and they list because it's very hard to get the capital required through institutional VC for life science companies to get them to a stage where they are generating significant revenues. So it is a bit of a top-heavy kind of business model, which does take upfront investment to get through those regulatory hurdles, but then the scale and the upside is enormous. So it would be, my hope is that that investment community grows over time and understands the scale and the social impact of some of these areas that are traditionally kind of niche, like for example, women's health, and really understand the kind of massive opportunity to impact huge global health issues with these companies.
I think you're very true that social element and the impact investment also comes into play. And we've seen in healthcare tech, even over the COVID, there have been some of the med tech companies have been fast tracked to IPO and listings so that they can generate more, funds out of the market. So it's an interesting play. But again, all the theme I'm getting is the strategic investors. If I can pull in Varun quickly, wearing the distributor, sales scaling hat. What would you recommend as a best kind of investment channel for medtech early stage companies?
So Irfan, I think what people need to, so we are heavy investors as well. So we invest in companies, in startups in the health medtech space and other sectors as well within the group. Yeah. And it, just to set context, so because our focus or our intent is to saying how do you impact 1 billion lives, and that's a huge number. Yeah. So like I said, our focus is on high volume, high impact needs that exist in the world. But when you look at it from so if I was to now wear and I've been a startup guy, I founded a couple of companies in that manner. When I wear that hat, the kind of investor to be looked at is should be someone, and to Michelle's point, someone who understands the space you're in, because health tech, med tech, life sciences, this requires patient capital, right? Yes, you can do the aggregation model in the old school health tech in that manner, and that's simple. That's a consumer centric model. That's not even health tech for that matter. It's an aggregation, doctor aggregation, services aggregation play. But true health tech or med tech for that matter requires patient capital. So you need to find someone who understands that yes, it is patient capital, because you cannot rush through the process of it's a hard process of actually the design, development, validation, trials, approvals in that manner. And so you require someone who understands that, has the network to help you support it, or can bring on the network if needed, and has the patience to support you along that journey. So that's the key to be looked at. I think the other thing to be looked at is, and like any other thing, is what is the value that, money is easy. Money you can find, but what apart from money do you need to be able to take? So for example, if I'm taking Madison's example, so we are able to, as a partner, provide, say, design, engineering, manufacturing, and market access, right? Now that's just because of who we are. That's because of where we are coming from. And there are many, I'm sure there are hundreds of other players like us in different spaces who do that. So it's also important to understand what your investor would bring to the table. So one is the patient investment capital, someone who understands that. Second is what are the capabilities that the startup may need that the potential partner brings on the table. So now and by the way, this can be done through VCs, it can be done through PEs, it can be done through strategics. It doesn't matter. It could be either or. It could be it's a combination of all that. So in my mind, it's those two factors that need to be looked at. Doesn't matter who the person is. Yeah. But I think the key is, and again to Michelle's point, someone who understands this is going to be a journey.
Yeah.
And is willing to walk through it with you, and brings you the other additional capabilities along with
I totally agree, Varun. I think it's more than just pure money. At the time, it's access. I've heard of distributors and organizations who've got access to NHS. Then it's about adding more portfolio of products or devices. Then it's easy access rather than you just knocking on the doors of NHS, or even in India, which is a large ecosystem. So it's more value than just pure money. The network connection, access, distribution, the access to healthcare groups, all those come into play. So that's very well summed up. I want to switch the gear and into the last question. We are just running over the time. Now, around collaboration, networking, and support from incubator accelerators, how do you see the role for Australia and India ecosystem? How much important these organizations who are operating both sides either on their own or have presence across both the regions? What is the role for them to play? Let me start with Dr. Uman. John, if you want to share how important the role of these incubator accelerators or these organizations supporting this ecosystem have a role to play in actually fostering this collaboration between Australia and India and adoption.
Thanks, Irfan. So I'll just share about our experience. So we've been partnering with UNSW and running the Health and X program, and we've had one in-person visit and one virtual one, and both have been extremely productive because we were able to introduce these Australian startups to large diagnostic players, large programs in India, interaction with the TB control program or with the Ayushman Bharat program. So a network is very, very important. So, and getting them plugged into the right network and leveraging the network is key. And you will be pleased to know that actually this year we would be launching a health acceleration program, which is going to invite focused startups that are going to work in some of the thematic areas. One of it most probably is going to be multi-morbidity, NCD, and infectious diseases and other things like we have seen in the COVID pandemic. So we hope to, we have already had conversations with several startup networks, including investor network, and we believe such an ecosystem will really fuel the growth of this whole journey. And there is a need for such a program, and we would be happy to support anyone who is looking forward to that.
Thank you, Uman. If I can get Kate, your thoughts, obviously being involved at various levels with the ecosystem and organizations, the role of incubator, all these ecosystem partners to fast track adoption. What are your thoughts?
I definitely think it goes to what a lot of people have talked about with data and being able to provide that that environment where we've got an understanding of the playing field that you're going into. So certainly, we create, what we do at Alcidion is create this platform, of standardized data with ontology and so forth. And so we've actually been creating in some ways our own ecosystem of players that we can join together. So where we can facilitate and be part of or contribute to something that is on a wider scale. I think healthcare IT has been for too long, or digital health, held in the hands of some very large players, and that data has been really locked away. So if we can create ecosystems of groups of people like-minded who are trying to solve multi-problems, but keeping in mind that the end user has to be able to actually access all of this in a way that supports actually enhanced healthcare outcomes is something that if we can all be on the same page around that, I think these incubators ecosystems are a really positive place to start.
I think, Kate, you touched on, I've seen a lack of, whatever the anonymous, the sanitized data set or sandbox that we talk about. We've got other sectors, financial services, transport, others, but healthcare needs to have that access as well, and these ecosystems can provide that. It's a very valid point. If I can get Varun for your thoughts around the role of these ecosystem partners and incubator accelerators to facilitate and fast track adoption.
So I think, Irfan, there are two things that these incubation partners or ecosystems can do. I think one critical one is there are thousands and thousands and thousands of companies out there trying to do something, or startups trying to do something. Yeah, and I think one key role that such incubators and the ecosystems can play is actually to actually push up what would be truly impactful or changing or altering and technologies or products or companies which could have a impact on lives or in whatever metric they look at. Because I think one challenge that comes for, say, someone like me or sitting where we are at is there is no way you can know whatever is happening around the world, and there is anyone can know for that matter. And the number of people, the volume of startups in this space is so humongous that there is no way that you can actually also be able to, run through them and filter them out to saying what you're interested in. So that's one key role such systems can play, right? I think the second thing that happens is and then coming to what you were asked, the question that you were looking at as well, is, incubators can help find partners and can help through the networks and otherwise support such players through access to whatever market they're focusing on, the problem they're focusing on. And they can also help find, say, a partner like a company like Motherson or someone else to actually work with them in that manner. Right? And it's a key role that is then played because it's because focusing on helping scale or develop a technology, help a company develop a product or a technology is that mentoring, if I was to call it that, when the support is critical. And I think that could be that is one of the big areas that these guys, that such networks and incubator systems can help in helping them actually progress to a point where they are then ready to either test or drive adoption in market. for which then other players can step in.
Great, thank you, Varun, for putting that in the right context, and various elements that the ecosystem can play a role, including organizations like yours, right through the whole the chain there. Michelle, what's your experience working with various ecosystem partners and incubator accelerators, if at all, or universities or any other programs, and the value that can help adoption quicker?
Yeah, our company is completely premised on collaboration. So we don't build any products without collaborating with many different global players, whether it be clinical players or partners or academic parties. And again, it's all about aligning incentives of those different players to, help them to either derive value from their data or derive clinical outcomes. And every market's very different. So the role that I see these startup ecosystem players taking is really facilitating two things. One is market intelligence, so helping you to understand the different nuances of the markets, incredibly important for that. But also network access to partners, customers, clinical providers, academics, government. They're real kind of key to building out that network, and they're kind of the gateway to that network. So yeah, market intelligence and network connections.
I think very well said. I think and it plays a profound impact at various stages as companies look to scale. So what you said is very impactful. I'm just conscious of the time, and we've overrun by 10 minutes. So I will wrap this session on that note. On behalf of Indo-Australian Chamber of Commerce, Into Innovation Global, we are a global innovation partner, facilitating Australia-India Innovation Bridge, helping companies scale between these two ecosystem. We've had a wonderful panel discussion. We touched on all the elements, key things being pragmatic regulatory approach in terms of governance. It's not one size fits all. It has to be fit for purpose and leading to a clinical trial as well. There's a lack of clarity, especially for emerging tech adoption. We need to really, look at plan and execute towards achieving higher standards, and then that can be applicable across other areas as well. In terms of investment, again, it was loud and clear. It's again aligning to strategic investors, best investors or the right stages, and more than just money, looking at aligned outcomes and creating impact, and be there for the long haul and long journey as well. Because in the medtech healthcare, the revenue returns and the process of adoption and distribution can take a long time, especially because of the regulatory conformance and all those kinds of things. And again, loud and clear, it's come out that role of incubators, accelerators, and all these ecosystem partners, whether it's gov or local ecosystems or healthcare groups, distribution partners, all of them have a role to play in fast tracking adoption. As Michelle mentioned, providing market intelligence, being a gateway to provide access to the network, the gov, the healthcare group, the sales and distribution channel, the clinical trials, all there's a great role for these incubator, accelerators, and ecosystem partners to play. And I think it's something which it resonates well across. It's a great time for Australia, India healthcare ecosystem to look together, to collaborate. Already during COVID, there's been a drastic level of engagement that's happened. And as I say, even for Indian startups, Australia is a great market to prove and validate yourself as a launch pad before even considering going into the MENA market, where if you have proved yourself into Australia and then you go into MENA or the Middle East market, you're perceived really well. So definitely there's a lot for us to leverage and work together. And for India, again, looking to produce or manufacture for the global healthcare requirement is a great opportunity to align to Australia as a strategic, value-added, quality-oriented, high-performance, healthcare partner and ecosystem as it scales towards achieving the $5 trillion economy or making that social impact. India is one market where you not only create a commercial impact, but also social impact, which is important as we look at the startup ecosystem for that humanity for good and making that impactful change as well. On that note, this is Irfan Malik again signing off and thanking you all, Michelle, Varun, Katie, and Uman. Wonderful to have you on board, and Michael as well. Great to have you on board, and all the support ecosystem, including AirMeet and my colleagues at InQ and AIBC. Thank you, and signing off on the note. Thank you again. Namaskar.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We share the light. We share the land. We share this journey. Join us for the adventure. Our country is waiting for you.